So that's me. I always like to put a picture of myself in my slides, so in case you get tired of looking at me, you can look at me, which is amazing. If you're on Twitter, I encourage you to follow me. There was a rule in my house where when I was born that mom picks the names and dad misspells them. That's because my dad was a brilliant man. He said in the early 70s, he turned to his wife and he said, "Hun, when our kids grow up, they're going to need a way to globally, uniquely identify themselves. So what I shall do is misspell their names." So I'm Nathan with an E instead of Nathan with an A, like every other Nathan that you know. So it's at Nathan Harvey on Twitter if you like. You maybe have heard my phone going off. I used to be on call. A community development person is never on call. But I sympathize and empathize with those people who are on call. And so when I give talks, I like to leave my phone on to show how great I was at on-call. Look how well I can ignore all of those Nagios pages that are coming in right now. Actually, the truth about being a community development person, I was talking with Laura about this a little bit earlier, is community development is all about making sure that everyone has a good time and enjoys the conference or the event or whatever. So when I left my operations role and went into community development, I say that I put down the pager and I picked up the bar tab. As it turns out, you're up at 3 a.m. either way. Totally different circumstances, though, so it's cool. But before I was a sysadmin, so what I'm going to do tonight, I'm going to tell a little story. Some of the story that I tell might be lies. Some of it might be truth. I'm sure I will point out the lies to you. And you can believe me, you can trust me when I say that. The other thing, in addition to telling a little story, I want to show you some code. That code I will probably write live in front of your face so that you can see what a great typer I am, and also how terrible I am at typing when people are watching. The thing I'm going to talk about tonight is relatively new for Chef. How many of you have heard of Chef before you came in the room tonight? Awesome. For those of you that haven't, it's spelled C-H-E-F, and that's all you need to know for now. We'll get you the rest later. But some of the stuff I'm talking about is relatively new, and part of the reason that we're talking about it is to get feedback. And so I'd love to hear your reaction to sort of some of the stuff, the technology that I'm going to show you tonight. Anyhow, so back to my story. I'm an application developer. I love building applications. I like taking my applications and pushing them through a pipeline so they move from my local workstation into QA or staging environment out to production where my customers can use them. That's where I get all the value when the customer starts using them. Of course, I also work at Chef. If you don't know much about Chef, here's the 2-second thing that you need to know about it. Chef is a framework for automating the setup of your infrastructure, for automating the deployment of your applications. So if you think about your application that lives maybe on AWS, AWS is awesome. It exposes an API that allows you to very easily spin up, spin down machines. Once they're up, you have to go and configure them. Chef can do all of that for you. So it can go in and, let's say you're running a Rails application, you can take a Chef recipe and put it on this AMI and say, this needs to become a database server, this needs to become a Rails server, this needs to become a load balancer, excuse me, and so forth. So it automates all of that process for you. And it allows you to do things like search your infrastructure to find out, if I'm an application server and I need to talk to the database, I can ask the Chef server, who's the database in this environment? So I don't need to know that configuration detail up front. I can have sort of dynamic configuration as part of my Chef, the way that I build Chef. So anyhow, back to my story. I'm an application developer. I love shipping products, shipping features out to my customers. Before I was a community developer, that part is true. I used to build applications and ship them out to my customers. I used to run real infrastructure. But one day this terrible thing happened. Someone came into my office and said, hey, it's time for us to do a compliance check. We need to do an audit of your systems. And I thought, well, it's cool. I manage my applications, I manage my infrastructure with Chef, so everything's automated there. I can write some pretty good code. That's not going to be a problem. What does this compliance officer need me to check out? What do they want me to look at? And little did I know that when the compliance officer came in, or the compliance person came in, the auditor, they came in with one of these. And I didn't really know what to do with this. I'm like, well, how am I going to take that and put it onto my machines and figure out what's wrong? And they said, oh, it's easy. You just have to follow all of these controls. That was bad. I'm like, well, let me just see what sort of control is out there. So I flipped open the book, and I came across this control. And it said in the book, SSH supports 2 different protocol versions. The original version, SSH v1, was subject to a number of security issues. Please use SSH v2 instead to avoid these. And I thought, well, that's pretty nice. Like they said, please. So they hope that I do that, and it will. Hopefully, I will avoid some of those issues. So like that's fine, but I can't go to Let's say Brian was one of my servers. I'd say, can you please use v2 of SSH? Like he might say sure, but like I don't know. How do I actually verify that that's the case? So I went to like our security person, or maybe I was thinking security and bash, and so I can fix this, or I can test this with a simple one-liner. I can use grep, I can use sed, I can use awk, and I can find out like what protocol version of SSH am I using? I'm like, that's fine. So I could go and I could run that against all of my infrastructure, and then I felt pretty good. I could tell my compliance officer, hey, I've got this, like here's the report, I ran that SSH in a loop, and I saw that I'm good to go there. And then I saw another, I don't know, I heard about this thing called OWASP, and I thought, oh, OWASP, that sounds good. I wonder what sort of controls they have. So here's an OWASP control that's a little bit more detailed than the please use version 2. Apache server information leakage, server token directive. Have you all read this particular control that's part of the OWASP framework? No? Yes, some no, and you call yourself the OWASP meetup? Like, of course you've all read this. But I can tell that maybe you haven't, because if you had read it, you probably would have fixed, let's see, there were some funny things in here. So first, this directive controls weather server response. I don't know if you can read it in the back, but it says weather. Like, is it hot outside? Is it sunny? Is it cloudy? Is it raining? So this directive controls the weather. That's pretty fucking awesome. Sorry, sometimes in addition to lying, sometimes I curse. So it controls the weather. And so I definitely want to take control of the weather because I always want it to be sunny. But in any case, like it lays out a bunch of stuff. Here's the URL. I'll make the slides available later so you can go and read the full spec. But at the end of the day, like if you're running Apache, what it says is you should not set your server tokens to full. You should have your server tokens set to prod or to product only. What does that do? Who's the Apache expert in the room that can tell me the difference between those? And by expert, I mean anyone that knows what that directive does. Someone must know.
No Apache guys?
All right, so who knows what Apache is? Okay, like that sounds like a funny question, but also, let's be honest, when we get together in groups like this, we make a lot of assumptions about the knowledge that other people in the room have, and sometimes those assumptions are really terrible, terrible assumptions. Okay, so you have the Apache web server. It gets configured with a configuration file. You can set a bunch of directives in there. One of the directives that you can set is this thing called server tokens. When you go in your browser and make a request against an Apache web server, in addition to the content that you requested, it returns a bunch of headers. Like, this is HTML content that is coming back. One of those headers that it will return is the type of server that's running. So when you have your server tokens set to full, it will say something like, this is an Apache web server running version 2.2.4 of the Apache web platform, right, of the Apache web server. If you set it to prod, it will say, I'm the Apache web server. That's it. It won't give you the version number. There's another server token that you can say that's like OS, and it will tell you, I'm Apache 2.2.4 running on Ubuntu. And so the directive, or the direction that OWASP is giving you here says, hey, if you tell people that are trying to attack your systems exactly which version of the package you're running and exactly which operating system you're on, they're going to target you for specific vulnerabilities. So they can just scan the web, find people that are running Apache 2.2.4 on Ubuntu, there's a known vulnerability, let's just go attack that. So it opens up that attack vector. So if you shut that down and just say Apache, people don't know what version, and then they're like, you're not as easy a target. That's the theory anyhow. Like you can go read the Apache docs about what it says about that server thing and whatever. So what that says doesn't really matter. What matters is, well, how do I check that? How do I verify that? And again, what I should do is not drop the remote, because then it will work. Again, I can pull out my old friendly standby tools, grep and sed. How many of you are like happy to use grep and sed on a regular basis? Also, yeah, right. And so, who can tell me what this is going to do? Ah, see, I tricked you. If you raised your hand, now I know you can answer the question. Greg, you like tentatively raised your hand, so now you're going to tentatively do it again. I love it.
So what that line actually says is look for the pattern of a line that starts with, the little caret starts with the word server tokens at the beginning of the line, and look for that pattern inside of the file, the HTTP conf file.
Yeah.
And then type the result of that line into the sed substitution string.
Yeah.
And the substitution string is basically going to the S slash means substitute. It's going to replace server tokens space with absolutely nothing.
Right.
And so basically that will transform that line inside of the HTTP conf file, provided you run this as root.
Yeah, provided you run it as someone who can read that conf file,
Right.
Which there's probably another OWASP thing that says that conf file should be owned by root and only readable by root, right? So that's cool. Did everyone understand how Greg explained that and what that does now? Yeah? Kind of a little bit. All right, so now who feels super comfortable with grep and sed? Oh, look, now it's even fewer people. That's weird. That's weird. So I have a question for you. How do you think, sorry, I have to back up a bunch because I didn't plan on asking this question. How do you think that dude feels about grep and sed now? Like the dude that walked in with the notebook. And by dude, I mean human, because I don't know. It's a made-up character. It might be a woman, it might be a man, it might be a non-gender specific person. But like they walked in with that notebook. Do you think grep and sed is something that they're going to sit down with you and be like, oh, well, you grepped and sedded that file and it said prod? Must be fine, right? Probably not okay. So, but like in this story, I made it through the audit. Like I was able to convince the auditors that we were safe. And I was really happy. Like it sucked, don't get me wrong. For like 2 weeks of my life, what I did was appease the auditor. And then the auditor left, and then I felt okay. Because the auditor was gone. So I felt like now I can get back to like running my business. The problem was I was in the minority of folks that felt that way. The management at the company was like, no. Like that took way too long. What we need to do is not have to like worry about the auditor coming in. And I'm like, yeah, that's a great idea. Why don't we fire the auditor? And they're like, no, you don't understand what we're saying. We have to have regular audits. We have to be safe. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to inject a new phase of your deployment process, and it's going to be called the security review. So as you're building things, before you move to prod, we want a security person to come in and look at all of the changes that you've made, sign off on them before they go to production. Seems reasonable, right? Yeah? Yeah. Like how many of you live in an environment where that's the case? Before you go to prod, some security review happens. That's awesome. Like honestly, that's awesome. You should review your stuff before it goes to prod. But for those of you that have that experience, how many of you, or live in a world like that, how many of you feel like the security review is like this? Because this is how I felt the security review was like, right? So here I am, I'm building stuff, and I'm building new features and things that I want to deploy out to production, and all they're doing is getting backed up by this big dam that we call security review. And it's not a mistake that I use the word dam there to block everything in that security review. So then what happens when you have this dam that is the security review that blocks things getting out to production? You have executives and product owners and managers that come along and say, yeah, look, I know that like that little stream right there on the other side of the dam, like it's blocked by the security review, but come on, it's fine, right? Let's just push that one through, just that one, right? And so you end up with this dam that's starting to have all of these little holes, and a little bit of water comes through. And what happens when you have a dam with a couple of holes in it? Like eventually, the whole thing just crashes down. So that sucks. So what ends up actually happening, and kind of what we did, was we said, all right, well, let's get rid of that security review because it's hurting us. And instead of doing that, we still need to be secure. We need to make sure that our applications are good. So what we'll do is we'll run a scanner against production, because that will then tell us when shit is broken, right? And that's great, right? Except, like, first, it's kind of like the check engine light on your car. I like to call those lights on your dashboard the too late lights, right? Like when the check engine light comes on, it's too late. When the low oil, especially the low oil, right? And I don't know how much you care about your car, but when the low oil light comes on, like it's too late. You probably should have like changed your oil, made sure that you had oil in there before. So scanning it after it's in prod is too late. Also, how frequently are you running those scans versus how frequently are you pushing new stuff to prod? Are the cadences in sync? Are they keeping up with each other? No, they aren't. Also, scanning after it gets to prod, how many of you test your applications when they get to production? Yeah, it's a lie. Like, only this guy is telling the truth. We all test our applications when we get to production. Of course, maybe you do some testing in advance, but let's be honest, all of your real testing happens in production. So scanning, not really good. Yeah, you got to smoke test in production, for sure, for sure. How many of you make changes directly to production? All right, one person is not lying. 4 people are not lying. That's awesome. Yeah, that's good. That's good. So, yeah. So Verizon, whether or not you have them as a service provider, one of the cool things that they do for our industry is each year they print out a PCI compliance report, and they tell us as an industry how we're doing. And like usually the news is pretty abysmal. It's not so great. So key trends. This is from last year's report. While individual rule compliance is up, testing of security systems is down, and sustainability is low. So if you think about those one-liners that Gref and said that I've put together, like how many of you know the sysadmin who, when they leave a job, they take their stack of one-liners with them to that next job, and nobody actually knows what that sysadmin ever did, because one, the sysadmin never lets you on the server because that's my thing, I built that thing, and if you get on here, you're going to destroy it. Second, you don't have my toolbox. Now I'm leaving, guess what's going with me? My toolbox, right? So it's really not sustainable. This, we all know, is certainly not sustainable. Having compliance come in, the compliance team come in with a notebook. Sometimes, like that compliance team or that compliance auditor has actually taken a step closer to us in terms of timeline, and maybe that's an Excel spreadsheet. Maybe it's a PDF document. But, you know, so maybe it's not quite as bad as a notebook, but still. And these one-liners definitely, like, they build up and they can tell us all the things we need to know, but yeah.
I can't help it, man.
Yeah.
That line doesn't do what he said. It doesn't change the file, it pipes it to sed.
Yo, he said pipes it to sed.
No, it pipes it to
I
sed.
said change the file.
But it doesn't change the file.
Oh yeah, it does not change the file.
It just
It changes the
Look
output. Look at that, look at that.
It
See,
just
spits
prints
out
out
the-
just
You're right,
the
you're right.
Yeah.
It just spits out what this.
See, these are probably fine. Let's just
Hold on for 1 second.
I couldn't help it.
Why are you using, but the S is for substitution.
But you're substituting the
You're
pipes
you're
data.
substituting because you don't want to see server code in that
prod,
line. You just
right.
want to see prod. He's being
Prod
really
or full
implicit, so he
or
wants to
product only.
see just prod only, or full.
But it's not changing the file, it's
Yeah.
just
You're right,
changing the pipe.
It is
You're right.
It's
But why would you want to just see that?
I was gonna ask the same question.
It's all very traditional.
It's from the graph.
What, because what the compliance officer said, does it say prod or prod only? And I ran a command, and the only thing that came back was prod, and the compliance officer was like, well, I don't understand what the hell that does, but it says prod at the end, so check, you're good. Remember the goal. Remember the goal. When the compliance person walks in the room, when the auditor walks in the room, the goal is to get the auditor out of the room as quickly as possible. So if we blind them with crazy, arcane command line tools, then we can totally get them out of there sooner. I'm also good at ignoring phone calls. Watch that. See, I hope that wasn't my wife. That might have been the compliance officer.
So why don't you put prod at the end of the statement? You know, you'll be good
Yeah, of course. Like, of course, like the thing you do is you echo prod. And you just, let me echo prod on all of my machines. Look, they're all prod. It's good, right? So yeah, get the compliance officer out. What about, like, I'm a DevOps person. Although I don't believe in the words that I just said. I'm a DevOps person. Like, I automate all of my things. The way that I configure my servers is with code. So, like, I have a problem here where we're all talking very different languages. The auditor is talking in notebooks or in Excel spreadsheets or in PDF files. The security person or the sysadmin is writing up a bunch of shell scripts. The developer is writing up, code. I think we just need to stop all of that. We also need to stop our goals when the auditor walks in the room. Like, my goal when the auditor came in the room was to get the auditor out of the room as quickly as possible. You may work in a place where, and I'm sure this has never happened with me, where the auditor walks in the building, and what we do is say, keep the auditor in the east wing, keep them out of the west wing, because we don't want them to see what happens over here. This is where all the magic happens. We don't want them looking there. They have to see on this side of the building. So we need to stop all that. We also need to stop thinking that compliance and security are the same thing. Security and compliance are not the same thing, right? If my goal is to be compliant, that's not great. Like, why do we get audited? Why do these things come in and ask us to be compliant? So that we are building systems that are secure, so that we don't get hacked, so that our systems don't fall down, so that we don't expose our customers' data or our citizens' data to the rest of the world or to bad actors or to anyone that shouldn't have that. So we can't think about compliance and as the same thing as security. I appease the auditor, therefore I'm secure. That is not a true statement. That's not what it's about. So we have to really go back to sort of first principles and think about security as the place. Sorry, the room got kind of dark here for a minute. Like, we were all happy and jovial, laughing at Sed and Hawk and Grep, but now, like, security, it's a real thing, and we have to like, our goal should be that we're building secure systems. And by building those secure systems, we will also be compliant. And the compliance, those controls can help inform how we build those secure systems. But it's not a thing that you can tack on at the end. So how many of you have read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance? Right? So I'll be honest, I haven't, but I know because I listened to other smart people who wrote this slide, and by wrote this slide I mean there are some speaker notes and a picture. But I know that, like, in this book, what he's talking about is you don't tack quality on at the end. We built this thing, now it's time to bolt on the quality feature at the end of building out this motorcycle or what have you. And so this is it's a problem that we face in our industry, right? How many of you work in the QA department? Okay, you do. So when shit breaks, it's your fault, dude. Like, I wrote it. It's cool. I don't need to worry about testing it. I have a QA department. They're going to make sure that it works. So we aren't sharing the responsibility, maybe. We aren't thinking about it in the right way. If I put it off on someone else, like, now all of the onus is on him. All of that burden is on him. And I can just write the things like, hey, my feature works. It's what the customer asked for. QA will solve it if there's a bug, or will prevent that bug from going out to production. So we need to not think about things like that. We cannot bolt security on at the end. And also, as we think about that, you'll recognize that what I'm talking about is not necessarily just tooling. It's really about culture, or the attitude, the approach that you take to your work. It's the culture and the tools. We have to work together. And really, as it turns out, the culture in your organization is informed and reinforced by the tools that you select. And the tools that you select and use and the workflows and the processes that you follow are informed by the culture that you have. Now, you stood up. Do you have a question, or you're like, yeah, I'm QA and I'm proud and I'm going to stand up?
I just looked at it, but I do it. I'm fairly new to the technology sector.
Yeah.
I'm surprised how siloed each.
Yeah, wow.
like development, QA, network, all of it's so siloed, and I'm just surprised.
I know, it's shocking, isn't it?
Process, agile, all these different thinking, PM, everyone is, and there's no overall arching thinking. I mean,
Yeah.
in this whole process like this.
Well, there's actually a control called separation of duties.
That's true. That's true. Like there's a control that says separation of duties, right? And so separation of duties says this, like you write the code, you deploy it to production.
And never shall you teach
And like, yeah, whatever you do, those are your jobs. And like, I was at an event recently at Capital One in Gill House. I'm going to credit him because I'm about to steal his words. Like, you write the code, you deploy it. Time goes on, 10 years later, you two sit this close to one another. You probably have kids on the same softball or baseball team. Like, the chances of collusion, no, they're like, you write the code, you deploy it, totally separated of duties, right? You never go to lunch together, do you? Of course not, right? So, yes, and kudos to you, like, yeah, everything is siloed so that we can all be supervised and not work together and not care about the system. I care about what I did. Like it's horrific. It's terrible, and we need to fix that as the industry also.
I mean, I didn't have my education wasn't in CS or IT, but as a part, even it begins at the very beginning. Even specializes when you say between CS, CE, networking.
Absolutely.
I'm just surprised at that one.
Yeah, I'm surprised every day. Also, like, how do computers even work? Like, how do we ever deliver value to our customers ever? Honestly. Okay, so. I think we can all agree, and maybe by all agree, maybe we can all agree that at some point this happens, maybe for you it happens today, that we are beyond the point in time where we can let humans go and act on systems. What we need to do is have humans acting on code or writing code, and that code is what manages the systems for us. We need to have this. Because when you have a human that goes and interacts with the machine, what's happening there is, one, you can't scale it. Two, you can't predict that it's going to be the same thing every time. Like, things get forgotten, things get missed. Humans sometimes have fat fingers, and that has nothing to do with the size of their fingers, as we all know. Like, you just make typos. So we need to be at a place where both compliance and the security team and the people that are managing our systems all have a language that we can speak together, and that language has to be code, and that's the language that I want to talk a little bit about tonight. So I'd like to introduce you to this relatively new language called InSpec. How many of you have heard of InSpec? All right, that's good. One of my colleagues has heard of InSpec. That's good. That's good. We both get paid to know at least how to spell InSpec. And someone else in the room also, who's maybe heard me talk once or twice before. So that's good. Like, it gives me hope. InSpec. I can make it across this bridge. So what is InSpec? InSpec allows us to create checks for these controls in a very descriptive language. So here I have describe service SSH agent. It should be running. I bet even that auditor with the notebook could read this, recognize that it's code, probably not know what that do and that end are doing there, and those curly braces, what do those mean? But that auditor could probably parse this in their own head and understand what we're checking here. So I can take that test and I can run it on a target. So I could write that script, that little test script. I could run it locally on my machine, and it will tell me I've passed one example. That worked. I could, so I can run it locally. I can also run it remotely on another machine that's out there in the world. So I can run this inspec exec test.rp, pass a credential, and then go up to SSH EC2 user at this IP address. And what will happen is that test will go out to that machine and execute there. How many of you like Docker? You can do it in Docker as well, containers. Everyone's using Docker, right? Yeah? All right, Greg's using Docker. That's awesome. And you're thinking about using Docker.
Playing with
Yeah, playing with Docker. Who's playing with Docker? Yeah, there we go. All right, cool. How about Windows? Anybody using Windows? All right. Also, someone that gets paid to work with Windows that is a colleague of mine. Yeah. So you can do this over WinRM or over SSH. You can also execute it against Docker. So it's cool. You can test any target with InSpec. The next thing is, let's go back to that book. This SSH supports 2 different protocols. Let's take this text and turn it into an InSpec test. It looks like this. Describe the file. You give it the path to the file. Its content should match some regular expression. How many of you like writing regular expressions? Awesome, awesome. Not me. Not at all. Like, that sounds pretty terrible. It's okay, and like, this also might help get the auditor out of the room, because I can say it's a regular expression, and they'll say, oh, that guy must know what he's talking about. It's like he wrote a regular expression. I don't know. Yeah. InSpec actually includes a bunch of resources that are smart enough that you don't have to write so many regular expressions. So there are a couple of things that have changed here. So first, I had to know, in order for me to check the protocol of SSH, I have to know where that configuration file exists. InSpec gives me a resource called an SSHD config. It knows where that configuration file exists, and it knows how or where that file might exist on various platforms. So it isn't the case that it's different on Ubuntu than it is on Red Hat. But if it were, InSpec would know this because it's abstracted that knowledge away. So it knows where the SSHD config file is. And then the config file itself, have you ever played with an SSH or read an SSHD config file? It's basically keys and values. So it will have the word protocol, and then it will have some value after it. Except I did that wrong because you're facing this way and I'm facing that way. We'll have the word protocol, and then it will have some value after it. Keys and values. So InSpec is smart enough that we can just say its protocol should compare to 2. And we use this CMP. What CMP or compare will do in this particular language is it will say, it doesn't matter if it's a string or an integer. If I give it an integer here and it happens to be a string in the file, it'll know that 2 equals this. The 2, the number, is the same as 2, the string. And if what I just said is like, I don't even know what this guy is talking about, it's the number 2, how can that be a string? What even is a string? It's cool, it doesn't matter. You don't need to know that to write this. So there are a bunch of available resources that InSpec gives you out of the box. The other thing that's really nice about InSpec, and you can read them all here, the other thing that's nice about InSpec is you can write your own custom resources as well. So in addition to being able to understand how to parse an SSH config, one of the things it knows how to do is parse an Apache configuration file. So that server tokens thing, you can just control how that works, and we can describe that very easily. So, yes?
So you said that SSH config or SSH deconfigure, I forgot which resource, but the resource knows exactly where the file is. Is that something you have to configure?
No. So unless what you've done is say, I know what we're going to do to be secure. We're going to store our SSH config somewhere where it usually isn't. Because then they won't find it. Like if you do that, then you have to tell it, hey, it's over there where it never is. But if you're just following the standard, like this is how SSH is configured out of the box on this particular platform, it will know where to go and grab that file. Yes? Yes?
So how does your language compare to like SCAP? Is this kind of like duplicating the same type of functionality?
Yeah, so I'm going to let Greg answer that question.
Well, I'm not 100%, so how do you want me to answer? I mean, I'm not 100% sure.
Here's why I want you to answer the question.
Okay.
I don't think I've ever looked at a SCAP profile or a SCAP language. So what I could say is words, and they would be.
All right, so SCAP, security content, I'm going to do this, right. Security content automation protocol is actually a suite of 8 XML standards, which taken together describe a whole lot of things that you can do to attest and validate the configuration and vulnerabilities of a given target. It's very complex. It's in XML. The only way you can use SCAP is to have an SCAP reader that knows how to consume it and target it. And so it's very heavyweight. And one of the biggest differences is that in most organizations, only the security team uses an SCAP scanner. and no one else in the organization uses one.
Because some compliance checks can be found in SCAP,
Absolutely.
XML.
Absolutely. Anyone could scan with SCAP. Anybody can. But most agencies use Nessus to scan, and most agencies, the Nessus license is only used by security, and the security team refuses to allow the developers to use it. And heads are nodding here.
Yeah.
So one of the biggest differences, this is developer friendly.
Yes.
And SCAP I would say that this is HTML and SCAP is SGML. If that metaphor makes any sense, or it doesn't.
No, what does that mean?
Sorry, well, SGML, Simplified General Markup Language, was a spec that existed for many years to mark up documents. But nobody used it because it was too complex and it satisfied the entire domain space. HTML 1.0 had exactly a fixed set of tags, and everybody adopted immediately because you could learn it in an afternoon.
Right.
And I guess to some extent, the big difference is this is much friendlier for developers to use, and it's part of the pipeline, and it has a Ruby-esque type syntax. So anyone who knows Python, anyone who knows Ruby is going to be able to pick this up pretty quick. SCAP is written in XML, and it makes your eyes bleed.
How many of you get itchy a little bit when every time Greg says XML? I can't even say it well.
Is that?
Can I throw one thing out?
Yeah, please do, Laura.
Yeah, the one thing that you kind of mentioned in passing was that it's part of the pipeline, and that I think is the other important part, is that you wouldn't run SCAP, like you wait until after the code is ready to go. Whereas this can be done as the code is building.
And that's what we're going to talk about next.
And I think to some extent, if as you go down the path, these don't have to be incompatible with each other. What you're doing with SCAP and those things do not have to be incompatible, in part because SCAP is trying to solve a very large domain space. It's not merely what is the setting on my servers, which is what Nathan has been describing. It's also to represent a new vulnerability that's found in the wild, and to represent that vulnerability for people to watch for that vulnerability in their code. So SCAP covers the SCAP spec covers a very broad space, and that broadness makes it very hard to use in the pipeline with the people that are used to working in the pipeline.
Awesome. Thank you. So also part of the reason I asked Greg to answer that question is because I want to remind everyone that when you come to a meetup like this, just because the person is standing at the front of the room doesn't mean that they're the one with all the knowledge in the room. Because I could never have said all of those things. And so when you come to a meetup like this, I encourage you to share your knowledge as well. All right, off the PSA for a second. I do want to talk about a cool new feature of InSpec, also that kind of talks about the SCAP. InSpec very recently added a new feature where InSpec can now consume various formats of these checks and actually translate them directly into InSpec. So you can actually feed an SCAP profile into the InSpec interpreter, and it will output tests that look like this instead of tests that look like XML. And that's pretty powerful stuff.
We gotta clap for that.
All right.
That's amazing.
That is pretty amazing, right? Okay, so at a high level, and what I'm going to do here in a minute is I'm going to start making some typing, and we're going to see all of this stuff in action. So with InSpec, you can target any system, test any target, and you can be very expressive with the tests that you're writing. And to be fair and honest, I've only shown you about a quarter of the InSpec language so far, like the custom resources and the custom checks. We'll talk about some of the additional stuff that you can do there. But let's get to a place where, as Laura was mentioning, and as Greg mentioned, we can take this InSpec and build it into our development pipeline. So instead of waiting until the end when we run the scans, we can actually, during our development process, on our local machine, can actually run this InSpec test against the infrastructure that we're eventually going to deploy to production. Now this does make some assumptions, like you've automated the way that you build out your production servers. It's not, I open up a ticket and then someone over there like goes into a lab and spends 3 weeks with a physical machine, and then at the outside of that, at the end of that 3 weeks, there's a machine in the data center somewhere that I can access. What we're talking about is we've automated that in some fashion, although with InSpec you can also test those machines. But let's say I do want to test, let's say it's an Apache web server. I want to test that Apache web server locally. So locally I run a Mac. How many of you run Macs locally? And Windows? Like, and then some flavor of Linux or something other than, yeah. So like you develop locally. How many of you, the machine that you work on a day-to-day basis is the primary flavor of operating system that runs in your production environment? Yeah, I don't run any Macs in production either. So it's cool. And not all of you run Macs, of course. But so if I want to truly test this framework, if I truly want to test the machine that I'm eventually going to deploy, I need a way to test it locally. And I don't want to test that Apache configured on a Mac is configured properly. I want to test that Apache configured on, let's say, Red Hat is configured properly. So there's another tool that sort of exists in the world, in the open source world and within the Chef community, called Test Kitchen. How many of you have heard of Test Kitchen? Like, all right, cool. Like, the dude I work with, it's good. He should hear of everything, like almost every question I ask. If Galen doesn't raise his hand, then like he's gonna raise his hand, even if it's a lie. Yeah, I know that for sure. Right? So what Test Kitchen will allow you to do, from my machine with a very simple command, I can create a virtual machine. That virtual machine may live locally on my machine. It may live off on EC2. It may live in Microsoft Azure. It may live in OpenStack and DigitalOcean, who knows where. But I go and create a VM. That VM is the same operating system as my target system in production. I can then install the right code and configure that machine. So these slides you probably can't read. But again, I put some like reference material in here so you can come back to these slides after tonight. So what I'm going to do next is I'm actually going to show you how we can use Test Kitchen in conjunction with InSpec to actually launch a machine and execute our tests against it. To do so, I'm going to sit down and start typing some code. Okay, so can you see that in the back okay? You can read that okay? That's, kind of all right anyhow. Okay, I'm gonna, this is, how many of you are shell experts? Like you love to work on the command line? How many of you enjoy, find it mildly better than with the clicky, clicky, clicky? Okay, to be clear, I definitely prefer typey, typey over clicky, clicky. Much, much better. So I tested you earlier about grep and sed. So I'm going to test you about this command. What is this going to do? Does anyone know what that will do? It's totally a trick question. I don't expect anyone to know what it will fail. No, so the shell that I'm using is ZSH or ZSH if you want. And so the take command is pretty awesome. Watch what it does. What that just did was it did a make dir-p and then it cd'd into that directory that I just went to. Because how many times do you make a directory and then cd into it immediately? All the time, right? So take on ZSH. There. Like, if you learn nothing else tonight, it's learn those two things. Use ZSH and the take command, and I made your world better. It's good. So now I'm in this directory called the OWASP directory. What I'm going to do is, let's implement that test for SSH first. I want to make sure that SSH is running protocol version 2. So to do that, I need a virtual machine that I can use, and I'm going to configure that virtual machine with Chef, of course. So I'm going to use this command here called chef. I'm going to generate a thing called a cookbook. I'm going to call that cookbook Apache, even though I just said we're going to test SSH. Eventually, we're going to turn it into our Apache web server as well. So with Chef, we write things called cookbooks. In those cookbooks, we store a bunch of things, including recipes. Those recipes are how we configure what our servers are going to be. If you get lost while I'm typing this, I'm sorry. But also just ask questions as you have them, and I'm happy to answer those questions for you. But be forewarned, if you ask a question, I might also ask someone else to answer that question. Greg can tell you about that experience. So I run this Chef Generate Cookbook Apache, and what it does is exactly that. It generates a cookbook called Apache, into which I can CD. But what I'll do first is I'll just run the tree command on Apache, and we can see what it did. So it created a bunch of files for me and a bunch of directories for me. So like that's cool. The very first or very next thing I should do, I think, oh no, I could just CD into Apache, so that's cool. And then something crazy happened with my shell. What happened there?
Still doing it in the version control.
Yeah, I'm in version control. How many of you use version control system for reals? Yeah, which one do you use? Git, good. How many of you use .back? No? .back, it's like the first version control system that everyone uses, right? How many of you have ever used .back as your version control system? Either you don't get the joke or you're lying. So .back is like, I want to change a file. Before I change that file, I'm going to copy that file from file name to file name.back. And there, now I have a safe copy of that. Now I can work over here. That's the .back version control system. So I'll ask again, how many of you have used the .back version control system? And also, how many of you have ever edited a Microsoft Word document that has, at the end of its name, underscore v3 final underscore final underscore final dot dot? Yeah, like that's a version control system also. Those are both very shitty version control systems. So when it comes to version control systems, you're writing code, you should use a version control system. You can use any version control system you want. I really don't care. As long as it starts with GIT, you'll be fine. Okay, so what this did here is it told me I'm on the master branch and it's dirty. I have files that haven't been added. So if I run a git status, I can see, hey, there's a bunch of files that haven't been added to the repository yet. Now, I'm not going to teach you Git tonight, but I can't write code without committing it to Git because it's just muscle memory. So you're going to see me do that, and I probably won't talk through those things. You can just watch them, because if I talk through them, it will take me twice as long to type them. You're like, no shit, dude, type the thing already. And second, if I'm talking while I'm typing, I'm much more likely to have a typo. So I'm just going to do this really quick. And when I have typos, you have two options. If they're spelling errors, you can just laugh. If there are typos that you recognize that are commands I'm about to run, that's where you have two options. You can either stop and correct me, and then the command will run better, or you can wait, and then you can point and laugh, and then that will be more fun for you. Maybe not for me, but definitely for you. Okay, so then within this thing, one of the things that I have is a kitchen YAML file. Who's looked at YAML before? What does YAML stand for? Anyone know?
Yet another markup language.
Yes, it's yet another markup language, because that's what the world needs, is another markup language. So we have these files called .yml, and they're super easy to read for humans, super easy to read for computers. Also, spaces, not tabs. Remember that. It's important when you're typing the YAML. Okay, so one of the things that Test Kitchen, I told you Test Kitchen would spin up a machine for you, a virtual machine. Where is it going to spin it up? Maybe on EC2, maybe locally. That's all determined by the driver. The driver I'm using is Vagrant. If you don't know what Vagrant is, it's cool. It means it's going to spin up a virtual machine locally, and by default, it's going to use Oracle's VirtualBox. Again, if I'm speaking too fast and I lost you, it's cool. I'm going to make sure that I slow down at the important bits. Is everyone okay with that? Also, my timer tells me I have 10 minutes left, so I'm going to try to get all this done in 10 minutes. So I'm just going to look down here and look at this. It says platforms. I can run this on Ubuntu, or I can run it on CentOS. What I'm going to do is say, hey, we're enterprisey, we're the government, we're big business. So Ubuntu, that's for all the script kiddies. We're going to do this on CentOS. So what I'm just going to do is just comment out that line and then just write and quit that file. So now if I run a kitchen list, it will tell me that when I run this kitchen command, it's going to create a default CentOS 7.1 instance for me. So I'm just going to run that really quick. In fact, I'm going to run a thing called kitchen converge. Actually, I'm not going to do that yet. Totally lied to you. The other thing I'm going to do is not that. There we go. I'm going to uncomment these things that allow me to use InSpec as my verifier. So there we go. So now I'm going to run kitchen converge. That's going to take a second. What it's going to do is it's going to spin up a local virtual machine on my box, and it's going to be running CentOS 7.1. So that's just going to take another minute or so. Quick question for you. In your environment, like at work where you go, if you need a virtual machine to play around with in your development environment, how long does that usually take you to acquire? I heard the answer that I expected. God. So I have just acquired a virtual machine in, oh no, I'm going to configure it now also, so it's going to take just another minute. In less than 2 minutes, I'm going to have a virtual machine running a CentOS version that's a blessed version. It's blessed because I just said it was blessed. It's not really like, it could be a different version of CentOS and configured whatever, but it's just a virtual machine. There it is, I'm done. In less than a minute, I have a virtual machine that I can go and develop on now. So that's pretty awesome, that was cool. So what do we want to do? We want to test, is SSH configured properly? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to first, if I tree, there's this directory here called test. It has this thing called server spec, but we're not going to use server spec. We're going to use InSpec instead. So the first thing I'm actually going to do is remove some of that stuff. So I'm just going to cd into test and integration. And then from here, I see there's two things. I'm going to git remove helpers. I'm going to git remove -r helpers, and so that's gone. And then I'm going to cd into default, and I'm going to git remove -r server spec. And then I'm going to take InSpec. What's this command going to do?
And CDs into it.
Look at that. See? Some people learned something tonight. Oh, but it didn't so much like that, did it? We're back to what Greg said. It's going to fail. It totally failed. You're right. I don't really know. I don't know. Watch. I'm gonna. Whoa, what did I do? Jeez, what did I remove? Did I get rid of the test directory? Yeah, go me. Isn't that awesome? I like what I should do is yeah, just use git to repair that because I talked about how cool version control is. Now I'm just going to create a new directory. Why not? So in here, what's that?
You forgot that.
I did. I forgot .back. You're right. So in there, what I want to do is default. I'm going to take a thing called default InSpec. Oh, that worked. That was good. And then I'm going to create a new file called default_spec.rb. And from here, I'm going to test that SSH thing. So I have SSH d config. I definitely want to scribe. Thank you. So I'm going to describe a thing. Do an end, because we don't want to have any dangling ends. That would be bad. So I'm going to describe my SSHD conf, and I'm going to say it's protocol. No, I don't think I don't know. What did I say on the slides? We should totally check the slides. It should definitely do. I mean, it makes sense that you would need the quotes. Should comp, right? 2, like that. Except let's just wrap this guy in quotes here. All right, so there we go. My SSHD config should be 2. So to test that on that running machine that I have, I'm just going to go up a couple of directories. Ooh, not that, like that. One more up. And now I'm just going to run this command, kitchen verify. Let's make sure that that test is executing. So it's going to take that InSpec test, run it against that virtual machine that I've just created. And it says, hey, I've set that up. Verifying is done. Kitchen finished. 0 examples, 0 failures. Well, that seems wrong, doesn't it? Clearly, I've done something not quite right, so I'm just going to check my notes really quickly. Test integration default InSpec. I think I did the other way around. Test, integration, right. I'm gonna kitchen verify, just like I did before. And this time, something failed, clearly because something turned all red. Verify action, undefined local variable or method,
You want to
SSH.
describe SSH config in your test.
Config, not conf. Think so? Yeah? Good. Okay. Remember that thing I said about the person in the front of the room not necessarily being the smartest person in the room?
But isn't it great to have a VM that you can just run this again?
It's awesome. Like, look, I haven't broken anything. I actually haven't done anything. Hey, look at that. One example, one failure. So it's not set to version 2. I wonder what it's set to. And I can scroll up here and I can see that it's protocol. I expected the number 2, I expect its value, but it didn't get anything. What? Anyone have an idea why that might be?
You don't have SSH configured.
I do have SSH configured. That's like a fair, reasonable guess.
It's not running?
What's that?
It's not running?
It's not running. It is running.
It's not set to anything.
It's not set to anything. So what?
It's
Like,
not in the file.
how could that? Oh, it's not in the file. Let's log into that VM and take a look. So I'm going to do a kitchen login. I'm going to log in, and so what kitchen login will do is log me into the kitchen. So it's going to make an SSH connection into that virtual machine. And then I can use sudo, and I can vi/etc/ssh/sshd_config. And I'm going to search here for protocol. Proto would work. And look at it, it's right there. Why didn't it find it? Oh, it's commented out. Imagine if I'd written this as a regular expression. What do you think the chances are I would have forgot to make sure that that wasn't commented out? You've now been with me for about an hour. You should know it's pretty fucking common that I would forget to make sure that it wasn't commented out. So I'm going to do the terrible thing, like I should configure this with chef and do it right, but I'm not going to do it right because I only have 1 minute and 19 seconds left. I'm going to just manually fix that file. So now I've changed it, so protocol is set to 2. I'm going to write and quit that. I'm going to exit from the VM. Now I'm back here, and now I can run kitchen verify. And this is going to, again, execute that InSpec test against the running VM. And now I see I have 1 example and 0 failures. Now, I have this machine that's configured properly, and I've executed the test. Now, when I submit it into my deployment pipeline, when I go to QA, when I go to staging, what have you, I know that this machine meets all of my compliance controls, right? So I can build all of those controls directly into my code base and execute them with every change that I make. Now, because I am a little light on time, what I'm going to do, and if you want to see me, like if you want to watch me live demo it, I will, but I want to be cognizant of everyone else's time, the people that are like, yeah, what I want to do is leave, but I'm too polite to get up and leave while he's talking. First, I won't be offended. It's okay if you leave. It's cool. No one else here will mind. But, yeah, you have a question?
Yeah. I actually, one of those has to leave like 3 minutes to get
Cool.
the train.
Yeah. So you better ask your question first.
Yes.
Yeah, go.
So, with respect to that, I know that there are many services in the Nix world where if you make a change to a configuration, you will have to either restart or do something to that service.
Sure.
Does Kitchen take that into account? Because it could give the wrong, yeah, we're in compliance, it's version 2. Well, you didn't restart that service.
Right, exactly. So, in this particular case, the important thing here to understand is how is that test actually working? So in this case, what we're doing is we're checking the configuration of SSH, like the configuration file of SSH, which, to be fair, like that doesn't necessarily, just because you configured it, doesn't mean you restarted it or reloaded that configuration. So what I might want is a subsequent test that says, let me actually make an SSH connection and validate that it is protocol 2 that's running. So but you've highlighted this weird thing both about automation and about testing and about compliance. and the words I always say are about automation, but they apply everywhere else. You cannot automate what you do not understand, right? And that's a lie, actually. You can totally automate what you do not understand, usually to really, really bad results, right? But often, since you didn't understand it in the first place, you have no idea how bad those results are until like that too late light comes on. It's way too late. Yeah. So what I would hope to do, but I talk too much, is also do the same thing for Apache. And I was going to show you how to like write a recipe. So we were going to write this recipe, which would install the package HTTPD and actually start up the service. The way Chef works, if it is installed, it will do nothing. If it's not installed, it will install it. And then same thing with starting the service. Great. And then Laura.
So I think that there have been periodically a few different efforts to kind of create reusable code for locking down systems.
Yes.
And they have failed.
Yes.
And even 2 or 3 years ago when we first met, I talked with you about some of this stuff, and I don't think that it.
You saw the blank stare on my face?
I saw the blank stare.
Do you know what that blank stare was saying? I want to get the auditor out of the room.
So my question is given that,
yeah.
From your perspective, what do you think has changed? Which means, what do you think has changed? Why is a company like Chef suddenly investing in this?
Yes.
And what is the impact of that change from your perspective?
Sure. So I think the biggest thing that's changed is, or some of the big things that have changed are first, when we talk about DevOps, right? And Chef was kind of born in that DevOps movement or in that DevOps space, has grown up with DevOps. I hate the word DevOps, to be fair. Because when I say DevOps, I hear development and operations, and I want them working together. And then you get folks that are like, no, it has to be DevSecOps, because we can't forget Sec. No, it has to be Dev QA-SecOps. And what about the government? It has to be Gov DevSecOps. And enterprise, and like no, it's all of us, but it's back to your point. Let's think about the entire system, right? So part of it is, well, we have to look at what are the other folks in this system doing, and then are there ways that we can make what they're doing better? So that's one thing. The second thing is, when we look at tools like Nessus and other scanners, you look at SCAP, like, wow, it's a big honking pile of XML. Nessus, the security folks won't let anyone else use Nessus. Why not? Why not?
Because they feel it's too powerful and people are going to break shit with it.
It's too powerful. Maybe in some of the cases, like, there are only commercial offerings also, right?
True.
And so, like, Nessus runs a bunch of scans and I get output, but how much control do I have over the input? How much control do I have over the scans? So InSpec itself is open source. So I think that sort of has changed. I think also, frankly, if you go back 3 years, if you go back more than that, enterprises and the government thinking about using open source, like, things have changed a lot in the ensuing time. So I think there are a couple of things that are happening, right? You've got everyone sort of thinking about how do we eliminate those silos and work together to build the best services possible. You've got open source, so we've got new ways of working. We've got new adoption of new frameworks, new ideas. Open source is crazy. Like, why would anyone ever want to run open source 10 years ago? Everyone is kind of opening up their eyes to it, and open source is the right way forward. And then I think also, like, part of that open source is it's this idea of collaboration. So from a Chef perspective, one of the early successes of Chef was that we, as a community, shared cookbooks with one another. As we think about compliance, why don't we share compliance profiles with one another? Why don't we start sharing this code with one another? Because I tell you what, if we're in competition with one another, I'm not going to beat you because my SSH version protocol is set to 2, and I have a quick way of testing that. If you set yours to 1, that may destroy your company, and then I might win. But it's not because I set mine to 2 and you set yours to 1. Like, these are things that we all need to get better. And like that Verizon report will tell you, anytime like Bank A or Target loses a bunch of customer data, everyone in the world looks at people in our industry and say, what a bunch of knuckleheads. Like, it's not, yes, it impacted Target very directly, but everyone who works on computers as a profession, like, it might as well have been you that leaked all that stuff to Target or to people that were attacking Target. So as an industry, we need to all get better. So I think, I don't know, there are words. There's my opinions. Laura, you wanted to say something also?
So 3 things. One is
Yeah.
maybe we should name DevOps to rename it to Kumbaya.
Okay,
All
yeah.
together.
I'm down with that.
Second, kind of on Greg's note, like, I think also because we're all pushing that limit of 100 deployments a day.
Yeah.
The time constraints and running it as part of the build is kind of super important. So my question
Yeah.
is, when is Kitchen Generate going to actually include InSpec?
I wouldn't use Kitchen. Oh.
When you generated the cookbook,
Yes.
it generated the test directory and
Yes.
generated server spec.
Yes. So with the chef development kit will soon.
So I have the answer.
Oh.
Okay.
It is, as of right now, I haven't verified this, but I've been told this, so I might still be lying to you, but I've been lying to you earlier. But I've been told that the service spec files actually now include the stuff for InSpec. In the newest version of the Chef Development Kit that is out today. Nathan is on an older version because he's not on master all the time, he's a bad developer.
I am.
So then you can actually write InSpec inside your server spec files?
I believe so. I haven't verified exactly how that works, but yeah, the generators now have the stuff in there to generate InSpec, just like the kitchen YAML file has the InSpec up there. It's still commented out because we have made bad decisions in the past where we have moved people forward and like, I don't know what's going on. And so now we're being very much more careful about, hey, this thing is available, go use it, start using it, and at some point we'll switch over the actual generator.
So you're determining the business value.
Correct.
The other thing I'll say, and I know we're way down in the weeds and there's maybe 2 people in the room who care about this, if you've written server spec tests, in about 98% of the cases of the server spec tests you've written, you can put those same tests into an InSpec directory and they will work as InSpec tests. They're basically compatible languages. There are, of course, edge cases. A question back there.
How does InSpec integrate with Chef Client?
How does it integrate with Chef Client? That's a great answer, and I want to get to that. I want to show a couple of things. It's a great answer. It's a great question. That's a great answer. I'll ask the questions later. I'll take care of the questions, all right? You keep giving me answers, I'll ask the questions, all right? So I want to talk, before I get there, I want to talk about how to use InSpec with Chef Compliance. So Chef Compliance is another new tool that Chef has recently released. And as much as I badmouth scanners, like there's still a use and a place for scanners against your running infrastructure. So Chef Compliance does just this. There's the compliance dashboard. I have a running website. I'm going to go and scan that dashboard. I click on a little thing. It's that machine. I'm going to execute a scan against it. I'm going to run just the Apache web server scan against that particular machine. I hit scan now. It's going to find a critical vulnerability. One of the nice things, though, about this vulnerability that it's going to find, it's not that the vulnerability is nice, but the UI here, as I scroll down, I can see the particular thing that failed. I can see in the web UI itself, I can actually click over to the compliance profile. And from within the web browser, I can actually view the InSpec code that was executed to give me that result. I can also see reports about like where am I in terms of compliance. Now the reason it's cool to see the InSpec code is that I mentioned earlier, I've only shown you about 25% of what InSpec can do. In addition to those tests, InSpec also gives you the capabilities, the syntax, to fully describe metadata about each one of those tests. So here I've taken that that web server, the server tokens test that we had on OWASP, and I've turned it into a full InSpec test. And if I just read down through this, I have a control. It's called Apache Server Information Leakage. It has an impact. So how critical is this? Like if we tell you that operating system, is that a huge security vulnerability? It's actually not. It's kind of a small thing. So I'm going to say the impact is like a 0.1 on a scale of 0 to 1. It's a very small impact. I can give it a title, the server token directive. That will show up in that Chef Compliance web UI. And then a description. And here I just took the description directly from OWASP. The directive controls whether server response field is sent back to clients, includes a description of generic OS type of the server, and so forth. So now, when I'm the person that is looking at the results of a scan, I can actually see the why. Why did we implement this test? Because the other thing that happens with auditors all the time, they come in and they say, thou shalt do or thou shalt not do X. And me, being a petulant 4-year-old boy, say, why? Or why not? And they say, because thou shalt not do X. Why not? Because it says so right here in the doc. You shouldn't do that. Why not? Like, let's capture that within the actual test that we're writing, so we have it captured as code. You can also tag them. So here I've tagged this one as the OWASP SCGWS Apache, and I give a URL out to that actual description. And then finally, I have the actual test itself. Server tokens should equal prod. So with Chef Compliance, with InSpec, you can scan, report, automate, audit. You can do all of this throughout the entire lifecycle of your deployment of your applications. You can start by running InSpec on your local workstation. You can end by using Chef Compliance to run that InSpec against your running machines. And so, yes, pretty pictures. It looks like this. So I have a couple of quick commercials, then I'll get back to your thing. InSpec is open source. You can go and participate in that community. You can participate by helping us make InSpec better on GitHub. If you want, just last week, we did a webinar on Chef Compliance 1.0. There's a link to it. Again, I'll make these slides available. In that, we show how do you take an SCAP profile that's written in XML and ingest that and output InSpec tests. It's pretty cool stuff. You can do it with other frameworks as well. I don't think any security or compliance talk would be actually complete without a tweet from Swift on Security, InfoSec Taylor. We can head into this audit together. You don't have to live in fear because for the first time in forever, we're in full compliance here. Okay. So yeah, that feels pretty good, doesn't it? Sorry, I'm not done with the commercials yet. Another thing I do locally in the area is organize a conference called DevOps Days DC. It happens in June 8th and 9th. I am not the only one in the room who is a co-organizer of said conference. Our CFP closes April 15th. So while you're writing up that one for the AppSec USA, you may as well submit the CFP twice. You can double your odds of being selected. You should totally come to this conference because it's amazing. It's 2 days of fun, amazing conference. It happens, as the name implies, in DC. That's a lie. It happens at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, which is in Alexandria. But it's close enough. You can get there on the metro. Additionally, I am a co-organizer of the DevOps DC meetup group. So if you like some of what you saw tonight and you want to talk about other DevOps type topics, you can come to that. We're meeting next Tuesday. I'll be in Seattle, but the meeting is happening anyhow without me, which is cool. ChefConf is our annual user conference. It's in July in Austin. You should totally come to it. It will be fun. And then I'm going to just leave this up with my contact information and other fun little tidbits about me.